the bar, presumptively, and there was never any confusion about which bar we meant. Then, imperceptibly, Dickens became something more than the bar. It became the place, the preferred shelter from all life storms. In 1979, when the nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island melted down and fear of apocalypse swept the Northeast, many Manhassetites phoned Steve to reserve space in the airtight basement below his bar. Of course, everyone had their own basements, but there was just something about Dickens. People thought of it first whenever doomsday loomed. Along with sanctuary, Steve provided nightly lessons in democracy, or the special plurality of alcohol. Standing in the middle of his barroom, you could watch men and women from all strata of society educating and abusing one another. You could hear the poorest man in town discussing market volatility with the president of the New York Stock Exchange, or the local librarian lecturing a New York Yankees Hall of Famer about the wisdom of choking up on the bat. You could hear a feeble-minded porter say something so peculiar and wise that a college philosophy professor would jot it on a napkin and tuck it in his pocket. You could hear bartenders, in between making bets and mixing pink squirrels, talk like philosopher kings. Steve believed the corner bar to be the most egalitarian of all American gathering places, and he knew that Americans have always venerated their bars, saloons, taverns, and gin mills, one of his favorite expressions. He knew that Americans invest their bars with meaning and turn to them for everything from glamour to succor, and above all for relief from that scourge of modern life, loneliness. He didn't know that the Puritans, upon landing in the New World, built a bar even before they built a church. He didn't know that American bars descend directly from the medieval inns of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which descended from the Saxon alehouses, which descended from the tabernae along the roads of ancient Rome. Steve's bar could trace its lineage all the way back to the painted caves of Western Europe, where Stone Age elders initiated young boys and girls into the ways of the tribe nearly 15,000 years ago. Though Steve didn't know these things, he sensed them in his blood and enacted them in everything he did. More than most men, Steve appreciated the importance of place, and on the cornerstone of this principle he was able to build a bar so strange and shrewd and beloved and wondrously in tune with its customers that it came to be known well beyond Manhasset. Everyone has a holy place, a refuge, where their heart is purer, their mind clearer, where they feel closer to God or love or truth or whatever it is they happen to worship. For better or worse, my holy place was Steve's bar, and because I found it in my youth, the bar was that much more sacred, its image clouded by that special reverence children accord those places where they feel safe. Others might feel this way about a classroom or playground, a theater or church, a laboratory or library or stadium, even a home. But none of these places claimed me. We exalt what is at hand. Had I grown up beside a river or an ocean, some natural avenue of self-discovery and escape, I might have mythologized it. Instead, I grew up 142 steps from a glorious old American tavern, and that has made all the difference. I didn't spend every waking minute in the bar. I went into the world, worked and failed, fell in love, played the fool, had my heart broken and my threshold tested. But because of Steve's bar, each rite of passage felt linked to the last, and the next, as did each person I met. For the first 25 years of my life, everyone I knew either sent me to the bar, drove me to the bar, accompanied me to the bar, rescued me from the bar, or was in the bar when I arrived, as if waiting for me since the day I was born. Among this last group were Steve and the men. I used to say I'd found in Steve's bar the fathers I needed, but this wasn't quite right. At some point the bar itself became my father, its dozens of men melding into one enormous male eye, looking over my shoulder, providing that needed alternative to my mother, that Y chromosome to her X. My mother didn't know she was competing with the men of the bar, and the men didn't know they were vying with her. They all assumed that they were on the same page, because they all shared one antiquated idea about manhood. My mother and the men believed that being a good man is an art, and being a bad man is a tragedy, for the world as much as for those who depend on the tragic man in question. Though my mother first introduced me to this idea, Steve's bar was where I saw its truth demonstrated daily. Steve's bar attracted all kinds of women, a stunning array, but as a boy I noticed only its improbable assortment of good and bad men. Wandering freely among this unlikely fraternity of alphas, listening to the stories of the soldiers and ballplayers, poets and cops, millionaires and bookies, actors and crooks who leaned nightly against Steve's bar, I heard them say again and again that the differences among them were great, but the reasons they had come to be so different were slight. Every regular at Steve's bar was fond of metaphors. One old bourbon drinker told me that a man's life is all a matter of mountains and caves. Mountains we must climb, caves where we hide when we can't face our mountains. For me, the bar was both. My most luxuriant cave, my most perilous mountain. And its men, though cavemen at heart, were my Sherpas. I loved them, deeply, and I think they knew. Though they had experienced everything, war and love, fame and disgrace, wealth and ruin, I don't think they ever had a boy look at them with such shining, worshipful eyes. My devotion was something new to them, and I think it made them love me in their way, which was why they kidnapped me when I was 11. But now I can almost hear their voices. Whoa, kid, you're getting ahead of yourself. Steve would have me say it like this. I fell in love with his bar, and it was reciprocal, and it was this romance that shaped all my others. At a tender age, standing in Dickens, I decided that life is a sequence of romances, each new romance a response to a previous romance. But I was only one of many romantics in Steve's bar who had reached this decision, who believed in this chain reaction of love. It was this belief as much as the bar that united us. And this is why my story is just one strand in the cord that braided all our love stories together. Part 1. If a man can chart with any accuracy his evolution from small boy to barfly, mine began on a hot summer night in 1972. 7 years old, driving through Manhasset with my mother, I looked out the window and saw 9 men in orange softball uniforms racing around Memorial Field, the silhouette of Charles Dickens, silkscreened in black on their chests. Who is that? I asked my mother. Some men from Dickens, she said. See your Uncle Charlie? And his boss, Steve? Can we watch? She pulled over and we found seats in the stands. With the sun setting, the men cast long shadows, which seemed made of the same black ink as the silhouettes on their chests, and nearly all the men sported cummerbunds of blubber that stretched their XXL jerseys until the silhouettes looked like splatter stains caused by the men stomping in their own shadows. Everything about the men had this surreal cartoonish quality. With their scant hair, giant shoes, and overdeveloped upper bodies, they looked like Blutos and Popeyes and steroidal Elmer Fuds, except my lanky Uncle Charlie, who patrolled the infield like a flamingo with sore knees. I remember that Steve wielded a wooden bat the size of a telephone pole, and every home run he clouded hovered in the sky like a second moon. Standing at the plate, the Babe Ruth of the beer league, Steve dug at the dirt and growled at the pitcher to give him something he could pulverize. The pitcher looked scared and amused at the same time, because even while barking at him, Steve never stopped smiling. His smile was like the strobe from a lighthouse, making everyone feel a little safer. It was also a command. It bade everyone to smile also. It was irresistible, and not just to those around him. Steve himself seemed unable to stop baring his teeth. Steve and the men of Dickens were fierce competitors, but the game never once got in the way of their main goal in life, laughter. Regardless of the score, they never stopped laughing. They couldn't stop laughing, and the fans in the stands couldn't either. I laughed harder than anyone, though I didn't get the joke. I laughed at the sound of the men's laughter, at their comic timing, as fluid and quicksilver as their turning of a double play. Why do those men act so silly? I asked my mother. They're just happy. About what? She looked at the men, thinking. Beer, sweetheart. They're happy about beer. That softball game marked for me the beginning of many things, but particularly time. Memories before the softball game have a disjointed, fragmentary quality. After, memories move forward, smartly, single file. Possibly I needed to find the bar, one of the 2 organizing principles of my life, before I could make a linear, coherent narrative of my life. I remember turning to the other organizing principle of my life and telling her I wanted to watch the men forever. We can't, babe, she said. The game is over. What? I stood, panicked. The men were walking off the field with their arms around each other. As they faded into the sumacs around Memorial Field, calling to one another, "See you at Dickens," I started to cry. I wanted to follow. Why, my mother asked.